Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Is that working? Well, thanks everyone so much for coming out tonight, and a huge thanks to our speaker, Marta Yebra. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we're here where the lands of the Taungurung and Wurundjeri meet, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and present and any Indigenous people in the room today. I'm Awa from Kinglake Friends of the Forest, and we've been really looking into flammability and forests over the last couple of years. Earlier this year, some of you may have been at our event in March, where Dr. Philip Zylstra spoke to us about his research into the effects of fire on forests and the flammability of different forest ages. Dr. Zylstra is a former remote area firefighter and a fire behaviour scientist. And he took us through why planned burning is not an effective means of bushfire preparedness and how it can actually make forests more flammable by promoting dense regrowth and changing the forest structure so you lose the tall mid-story and trees that slow the wind down. His research is pretty stark. Planned burning is seriously damaging forests and it's not making communities safer. If you'd like to hear more about Phil Zylstra's work, you can look up some of his talks online. There's a great one called Decolonising Fire Science, and you can find it on YouTube. Dr. Zylstra's research demonstrates that we need to drastically rethink the way we think about and plan for fire in the landscape. A big part of this is working out how to detect and put out bushfires fast. And that brings us to introduce our speaker, Dr. Marta Yebra. She's a professor in environmental engineering at the Fenner School of Environment and Society and the School of Engineering at the Australian National University in Canberra. She's also director of the Bushfire Research Centre of Excellence and mission specialist at the ANU Institute for Space. So Dr. Yebra will be talking to us for about an hour and then we'll open up to questions. We are recording the session to share with the broader community, but if you don't want your questions to be recorded, that's absolutely fine, just let us know. And Karina, do you want to take a photo at some point? Are people happy to have a photo taken? No? I'm seeing some no's, so maybe we just go from the back, then no one's identity is, yeah, great. Beautiful. Well, over to Dr. Marta Yebra. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me? Just checking if somebody tell me if you are hearing me because...
Yep, sorry, just figuring out how to turn the mic on. Thanks, Marta, yes.
No problem. I wanted to make sure I don't start speaking if you don't hear me. Well, thank you very much for the introduction and of course for having me tonight. I apologize I cannot be there in person, but it's probably a good thing we didn't plan me to be in person because I woke up quite sick this morning, so bear with me, and if I'm a bit slow, just bear in mind that I'm with a little bit of a cold today. So yeah, we had a great introduction on the topic, on the importance of technology for early fire detection and suppression. And again, today, what I'm going to present is the work we do in the Bushfire Research Centre of Excellence towards that end. Okay, we know that fire is a natural process. It's an intrinsic element of many landscapes in Australia, but also overseas. And it has shaped ecosystems and it's been part of the local indigenous cultural practices for thousands of years. However, anthropogenic activities such as industrialization, land clearance, human population growth, and consequent climate change, and also the displacement of indigenous fire cultural practices and the subsequent adoption of large-scale firefighting and fuel management have significantly intensified fire activity. And I'm pleased that Phil Zylstra already presented a good introduction of some of these issues to you before my talk. So this slide, for example, illustrates the locations of extreme fires on Earth from 2003 to 2023 using 21 years of satellite data. What you can see is that there is a clear increase in the significant events, extreme fire events over the past 2 decades, both in the frequency and the intensity of these fires. And this has almost doubled the amount since 2003. So just let's go into details of what are the fire management challenges under these extreme fires. And for that, I would like to take you back for a moment to the Black Summer, specifically to the October 2019, when Australia faced the onset of the largest ever and most devastating bushfire in its history. And while doing that, I would like to recognize that many of us were directly affected by these fires, and I want to express my deepest sympathies for the hardship we all experienced. So we know that the impacts of those fires to communities, wildfire, the environment was profound, and my thoughts are with all those that were affected. So in October 2019, the Gospel Mountain Fire ignited in the Wollemi National Park, triggered by an isolated lightning strike. The figure on your right highlights the lightning strikes in blue on the 26th of October. As you saw, there were about 20,000 lightning strikes. And I also highlight the fires detected on the 26th and the 27th. So the initial point that is highlighted in the slide with this arrow here was located deep within the park and very far from any roads. It went in unnoticed until the fire was already quite visible. Notable, some lightning detection networks that are existing in Australia initially failed to identify a strike in this area. Also, there was the issue of prolonged drought that had created extremely dry conditions and some usual self-containment lines that we find in the valleys or in the gullies, for example, that are typically wet areas in the landscape that slow down the progress of the fire, were ineffective. So in that conditions, the fire spread very rapidly, burning 65 hectares within hours. So strong winds prevented the RAF team to be deployed into the fire by helicopter. And by the next morning, the fire had expanded dramatically to 521 hectares. So this is roughly 3 kilometers of a perimeter. So with the resources stretched very thin across the state and the conditions deteriorating, the response strategy was shift from extinguishing the fire to focusing just on containment. But imagine if new technologies allowed for automatic and continuous and precise detection of ignition points, enable rapid deployment of vehicles that can safely operate under all weather conditions to release retardant, preventing these fires that start very small to spread, and this buying time for the first responder to arrive. We wonder how different could be the outcome of this specific fire. Bushfires, particularly those like the Ghost Mountain fire that I just explained, that are caused by lightning, are an increasing concern for Australia, but also globally. Currently, the lightning inducted fires are responsible to approximately 80–90% of the burn areas in New South Wales and Victoria. And lightning ignitions are projected to increase by 11 to 31% due to climate change conditions. The challenges of these fires is that lightning ignition frequently occur in remote areas, like the case I just explained, and these areas are very inaccessible, decreasing the likelihood of initial attack success. Although meteorological services can predict weather events, a dry lightning storm typically involves thousands of lightning strikes and is time-consuming and dangerous to inspect all single strikes to look for potential ignitions. Also, lightning strikes occur predominantly in the afternoon or early evening, adding the complications of darkness to detection and early suppression. Also, there are safety concerns and logistically constraints that limit crews and aircrafts to only daylight operations. There are trials of nighttime operations across Australia, for example, using night vision devices in helicopters, but these are still only undertaken and it still remains very difficult to address new ignition fires outside the daylight hours. So these are the critical challenges that the Bushfire Research Excellence of Excellence I lead was funded for to address. So the center was established in response to the 1920 Australian Black Summer fires after extensively stakeholder engagement to identify what were the key challenges we were facing. And we have a clear vision of creating a paradigm change in bushfire management where early ignitions are accurately and reliably detected and suppressed before they become catastrophic and uncontrollable. So we believe we can achieve this, of course, first of all, undertaking advanced research and development, demonstrating technological capabilities of new technologies and existing technologies that might be underutilized. We want to engage in thought leadership on where Australia should be moving in terms of technological advance, early fire detection. We advocate for and safe standards and regulations on the use of these new technologies. We provide independent evaluation and benchmarking of these technologies, but also how these perform in comparison with normal practices that have been done over the last 50 years. And finally, we support innovation. We support innovation with open IP. All the algorithms and science we produce, we make them openly accessible to innovators and companies or agencies that can implement it. So why early fire detection? Well, this figure shows the concept in simple ways. So early detection ignition is very important to prevent large fires because the earlier you detect a fire, the smaller that fire is at the time of the first aerial initial attack, and the highest the probability of initial attack success. And this holds true independently of the complexity of the fuel loads or whatever fuel management you do. To effectively detect fires in this age of mega fires, we must enhance our existing detection capabilities, particularly, again, in these challenging scenarios like the Gospel Mountain fire. Many technologies for early fire detections already exist, but there is a critical question that still remains to be answered. And this is how can we further improve these capabilities? Because as we showed, they are not always effective. And this need especially urgent attention in those remote areas, again, with limited access when the resources are, or when the resources are already stretched. I'm going to deep now in a little bit more detail on what technologies are out there, and then I will present a specific detail on what we are doing in each of these technologies and what are our initial findings. So first technology is lightning detectors. So the importance of these lightning detectors is that, of course, you can accurately know where the strikes are, but also you can know which strikes are more likely to ignite a fire. And this is important because, as I presented previously in the Gospel Mountain fire, a lightning storm can have thousands and thousands of strikes. So it's very important to know where we should go to extinguish fires, and that should be to those locations that are more likely to cause an ignition. We do have also satellites. Satellites can provide fire detection at a very broad scale, but also they can give us information about environmental variables, such the fuel condition. The satellites can provide accurate information about how dry the fuel is and how much fuel it is, for example, and this is important for determining the probability of ignition, but also how fast the fire is going to spread. What are the kind of important aspects we need to know about technologies? We need to know if a fire is big enough to be seen from space. So these satellites, of course, are thousands of kilometers above us. So a fire needs to be of a certain size to be detected, and we need to know how small a fire can be detected by satellites. We also need to know if the satellite we currently have are sensitive enough to changes in fuel condition and flammability, for example. We need to know if there is cloud out the smoke. Some satellites cannot penetrate through cloud or thick smoke, so they won't be able to detect ignitions under these conditions. And of course, it's important to know when does the satellite overpass, because if it overpass after the ignition, the fire won't be detected when it's small. Another technology is camera-based smoke detection. You may have heard in the media that there are many areas in Australia that are installing cameras over the fire towers to detect smoke. So this is also a very capable technology, but the questions that remain to be answered is how far the smoke need to be detected. Is there occlusion or blind spots for the cameras that prevent this technology to be successful? Is there enough light to see the smoke? What's the rate of false positives? Because some of the algorithms that currently exist to automatic detect fires have a very high false positive rate. And this is because there are other things in the environment, clouds, for example, that may be confused by the smoke. Finally, another technology is IoT, terrestrial sensor networks. Again, these networks have a limited range, but they can be located in strategic locations, such areas of high ecological value or blind spots of the other technologies, providing a faster response because they are, again, closer to the ground. Questions that remind about these technologies is, are they close enough to the fire? Or are they downwind from the fire? So, of course, depending on the location and where the wind is flowing, these technologies may or may not be efficient enough to detect a fire when it's small. Finally, drones is another technology that can be used for fire detection, and we are exploring in our center. Questions that remain to be answered about drone technology is, how close do we need to fly the drone to detect a fire? And what happens if there is a dense canopy over the fire? Is the drone still able to penetrate the canopy and detect a fire that is burning underneath or not? So again, as you see, there are many technologies available, and these are only a few that my center is actively investigating. But of course, each technology can help to detect fire, but not every time. because the different limitations we've been discussing. So it's very important to understand their strengths and limitations so we can use them in combination in an integrated approach to make sure we can detect that small fire before it escapes out of control. And to that end, we need a very detailed evaluation, and that's something that we are doing. In my center, we are not only advancing and developing its technology individually, but we are evaluating how these technologies are effective, including different experimental methods. We use artificial signals of fire or smoke because, of course, we cannot only rely on wildfires for the testing of these technologies, and sometimes experimental fires cannot be achieved because we are under total fire bans or dangerous conditions for experimental fires. So we use artificial signal fires like patio heaters and smoke machines to test these technologies. We use experimental burns when possible, and most of the times we do these burns in campgrounds that already have campfires that can be legally lit without many troubles or permissions in a safe way. And of course, we also partner with the ACT Parks and Conservation Service and other agencies to attend the prescribed burns. So again, our goal is to find an integrated approach that leverages the strengths of each technology while addressing any gaps in the capabilities. So I'm now going to move into sharing a bit more of the progress we have made on the development and testing of each of these technologies. I will start with the lightning detectors. So in early 2022, we were aware of a US company called Fire Neural Networks who were marketing a new lighting detector network that was offering a new detecting system that was reported capable of mapping lighting in 3D. What does this mean? That the network was able to report with a claim accuracy of 30 meters the location of the lightning strikes, so the X and the Y, but also providing information about the continuing current in the lightning. This is a property when the lightning channel remains open over the order of tens to hundreds of milliseconds. And this feature of lightning has long been regarded as the cause of sustained heating of the fuel responsible for ignition. So imagine you have a candle and you pass your hand over the candle. If you pass your hand very quickly, you don't burn. But if you leave your hand over the flame for long enough, you'll get burned. I used to do this as a child. So I guess this is a similar property with the long continuing current. If the current is transmitting for long enough, it will ignite a fire. So the initial potential limitation of this network was the relatively limited coverage. As for the network to be efficient, needed to be 30 meters sparsing, which is much closer sparsing than other detection strike detection systems used in Australia. So what we did, we assembled a coalition of different parties, including Fire Neural Networks. We contacted them and we asked them if they were interested in trialing their network in Australia. We partnered with ACT Parks and Conservation Service, ACT and New South Wales Welfare Service, and also researchers from Western Sydney University. And we all decided to undertake a trial of the detection system in Australia. We installed 6 detectors that you can see in this map in the ACT. And we ran the trial during 2 fire seasons that unfortunately for the sake of this project were very wet, so there was not a lot of fire activity, what is good for fire managers and for the protection of the environment, I guess, but not so good for research. So for each fire during those 5 seasons that were suspected to be caused by lightning, what we did was undertake a visit to the site to establish as best as we could the point of ignition. And we took georeference photos. We also talked to the fire responders about the ignition itself, as well as how the fire was identified. And then we combine all this knowledge with data from the lightning sensors to try to determine the locational accuracy of the system, as well as if the strike was associated or not with long continuum current. That again is this property is known to be determining the probability of ignition. This was done for 11 fires, and this is just an example of one fire during that time. And just we are still finalizing the analysis, but preliminary results indicated that indeed there is no causal link between the continuum current and the ignition. You can see in this example that the closest strike with long continuum current, LCC, was 11.5 kilometers apart from the fire. And this was the case for many other ignitions we showed. Of course, long continuum current is not the only property that determines ignition probability, as even if we have the same long continuum current, other weather conditions and fuel conditions may determine whether the fuel will ignite or not. So we are still analyzing the data with more care. In terms of evaluating the location accuracy of the fire neural networks network compared with other existing networks in Australia, we saw a slightly higher detection accuracy in the location in the ACT, but there were challenges in those areas where the network density was lower. So as I said before, the network density needs to be a lot higher than current lighting networks that we do have in Australia. I just mentioned that environmental variables play a significant role in lightning ignition detection, not only the properties of the lightning. So one goal of the center is also to determine which specific variables are most influential and to what extent, because this understanding will allow us also to prioritize the development of technologies that monitor these critical environmental factors. So in this study, we demonstrated that the risk of aligning a strike to ignite a fire increases with higher vegetation stress. So the higher the vegetation stress, the higher the chance that a wildfire will be ignited given a lightning strike. Therefore, it's crucial to track this variable to enhance the detection of this vegetation stress that is mainly determined with the fuel moisture content, so how much water the vegetation has. I wanted to stop a little bit. I have talked already for a while for you to reflect in this photo and see what you see really in this photo. So this is a picture during the severe drought of 2019. And what you see is forested that reached very low fuel moisture content values. And the canopies were completely dead. So these trees experience leaf cavitation and shedding, transforming live fuels that regularly are green into dead fuels, which were very, very dry. And therefore, in these situations, the fires ignited very easily, and also this favored the spread of the fire and the extreme fire behaviors we observed during the Black Summer. So luckily, we have satellites that can estimate the fuel moisture content of across Australia. And this is an example of the Australian flammability monitoring system we created. And it gives us some information on when and where the vegetation is ready to burn. And therefore, it's more likely that a fire may start if there is a source of ignition. This is the data we provide with a satellite that is called MODIS. But when you zoom in into a specific area and you want to look into more detail, this spatial resolution doesn't give you a lot of information. So it's good for big picture seasonal outlooks, but not so much for detailed planning and suppression planning. For that, we need a little bit more spatial resolution. So we are also generated products with a lot more detail. So here on the right, you see exactly the same area, but with a higher resolution product derived from a satellite that is called Sentinel-2. So here you see differences on the slopes, the aspects of the topography with wetter areas facing south and drier facing north, drier fuel in the valleys that are covered by grasslands. So this gives a lot more detail for planning suppression activities and where the fire may progress. So there are many satellites, but unfortunately, none of those satellites have been designed to measure change in fuel flammability in Australia or elsewhere with a lot of sensitivity. So we are using this existing data to track these variables, but these, again, satellites don't fit the purpose and don't estimate these variables as accurate they could. And this is especially true when it comes to some fuels like the eucalypts that are extremely complex, and the flammability of the eucalypt trees are driven by many different variables, not only water content, but also physical traits, the amount of volatile organic compounds that they have, structural carbohydrates, and other compounds like phosphorus that they can even act as a natural flame retardants. So we need to design satellites that can not only track moisture content, but are specifically designed to be more sensitive to all these properties that determine the flammability of the landscape. And that's something that we are doing in my center as well. So we are designing the OSFuel mission that is tailored to monitor the Australian fuel flammability from space. At the same time that, of course, to develop the Australian space sector, because you may or may not be aware that this sector is very young in Australia. The Australian Space Agency was only formed 5 years ago, so we still have a lot to go and develop to demonstrate we have capability to develop systems and launch to space. So at the moment, in terms of the satellite payload development, we are in phase B, that is more or less halfway to the full life of a satellite to be operational. If we resource further funds, we expect to be able to launch a technology demonstration mission by 2026 with an operational instrument by 2028, with a constellation of satellites that can give us the temporal frequency of that acquisition we need, that is roughly 5 days by 2030. Satellite capability is useful for determining the flammability of the landscape. As we say, that is important to know the probability of ignition, but can itself be used for detecting fires. There are some limitations if there are clouds, as I mentioned earlier, and an important potential limitation is the trade-off between spatial and temporal resolution. To detect a small fire, you need both detailed spatial resolution and also high temporal resolution. But most of the current satellites can only give you either one or the other, not both. So we've been evaluating what's the capability for the current fleet of satellites that are operationally used for detecting fires to detect small fires. And what we see in this slide is the total burn area at the time of detection against the number of detections for different sensors or satellites. From satellites that have very high temporal resolution, so they collect data very frequently in the order of 10 minutes, to other satellites that require collect information once or twice a day but have very high spatial resolution. And what this figure tells us is that most satellites can detect the biggest fires, but the smaller fires are mainly detected by those satellites with better ground resolution. But most small fires are missed by all satellites at all. So this means that we need better capability in terms of satellites to detect small fires. The good news is that there are a few initiatives, international initiatives, and that's why our center is now pushing the technology in terms of fire detection from satellites, because there are some other technologies doing this, where they are planning to put a constellation of satellites that will be able to sample the ground with 80 meters every, it doesn't say in my slide, but it's every 15 minutes is the plan. So by 2025, they want to launch the demonstrator Pathfinder satellite with a constellation of 3 spacecrafts in 2026 and a constellation of 50 satellites. That is what will give us the frequency of data acquisition that we need for early fire detection by 2030. So moving into ground sensors or IoT sensors, the advantage of these sensors, as I said before, they are close to the ground and therefore they can detect smaller fires if they are where they need to be, because they have limited spatial coverage. You cannot put these sensors across the whole Australia. Just to give you an idea, you need a minimum of 50 detectors sparsing 100 meters between them to have some detection capability in a relatively small area. So even though these are low cost, it's not feasible to have these sensors across Australia. So again, the issue or the objective is to deploy them strategically in certain areas that you really want to protect or you are of high concern. So in terms of developing this technology, we have developed a prototype sensor node that raised an initial alarm of smoke. And these devices periodically monitor for environmental variables, including relative humidity, air pressure, but we also have a gas sensor every 15 minutes. But when there is a trigger, that there might be a potential fire, the sensor changes to active reporting and it updates information every 7 seconds. And it is just because these devices are solar powered, so you need to make sure you reduce the power consumption as much as possible. We have tested these devices and collected data for 7 experimental burns and 6 per-square burns. And this is some of the results we are seeing. What you see is the configuration of the detectors around experimental fire. So this is, imagine a campfire. In a campground, we place the detectors 30 meters away in different directions. And basically, we start recording. First, you see some background noise in the measurements by the different detectors in different orientations. When the ignition starts, you see a clear peak. And then again, where there is another ignition, you see clear peaks. What you see is also the sensitivity is relative to the wind direction, and there is a strong and this strongly affects the signal strength and what specific detector in a specific location detects the fire signal. Moving into cameras on fire towers, as I said before, many states and territories are moving into removing crews from the fire towers and substitute those with cameras on fire towers to provide 24/7 monitoring capability. This is especially true because the towers cannot be crewed in situations of extreme fire danger and not at night time. So again, there's a gap in capability to be able to monitor 24/7, but also there are concerns of safer concerns with people having to travel to the towers. And there has been accidents, especially in those towers that are in very remote locations. So the cameras on fire towers become a potentially more efficient and safer and also cheaper option than having crews on the towers. So in this field, what we've been doing is to develop new algorithms based on computer vision to detect the ignitions and segment the fire. So what you see here is an animation of a fire. And most of the existing algorithms, what they do is what you see here, drawing a green square around what they believe is smoke. What we are doing is going a bit beyond that and segmenting the smoke. So we are telling exactly which pixels are smoke and are no smoke. And this facilitates to know the point of ignition, because obviously the shape of the fire may give you a better idea where the point of ignition might be. So we are also putting together a publicly available data set of smoke detecting camera imagery. And this is a project we are still seeking for funding, and it's called Our Smoke. And this is important because the lack of large publicly accessible data sets from Australian fire towers are limiting the computer vision research community's ability to develop robust open source fire detection algorithms. You know, AI algorithms learn from what they see, so you don't provide enough data for the algorithms to be calibrated, they are not going to perform well. Also, there is an issue in terms of lack of transparency in the detection models from many commercial fire detection services. So they provide these services, but there is no a way to effectively compare quantitatively how accurate these algorithms are in comparison with others. And another interesting aspect is that there's a high cost of detection services that also limit the widespread deployment of this capability. Agencies are paying in the order of 3,000 Australian dollars per month to have AI capability to automatically detect smoke from cameras on fire towers. So with this project, what we want is to support the development and adoption of AI-enabled smoke detection algorithms, at the same time that greatly reducing the cost of camera-based fire detection in Australia. And again, we believe that this can be achieved by an open access national database that everybody can access to train algorithms, but can also be used to benchmark the performance of the algorithms. In terms of the evaluation of the capabilities of the cameras on fire towers per se, we've been examining how distance of the ignition source, fire ignition, affect the detection by placing cameras at various distances from the fire sources. And while it might seem intuitive to assume that the greater the distance will result in a longer detection delay, our findings show the opposite. As you see in this figure, the higher the distance from ignition, the shorter the detection delayed. And this is because it's not only the distance what affects the detection, but also other factors like terrain, wind direction. These factors also play a significant role. So these elements can influence how smoke and fire signals reach the camera, sometimes allowing more distant cameras to detect fires more quickly than those placed closer if there is no anything occluding the progress of the fire or the visibility of the camera. Another technology we are evaluating is the scout drones. Drones are getting very popular, as you know. They have dynamic coverage. They can go very quickly to different locations and flying under very severe weather conditions to determine if there has been an ignition. They fly below cloud coverage, so they don't have the limitations that satellites have, but they suffer of extreme regulatory restrictions at the moment. So what we want to demonstrate with drone capability is that they can be used to validate bushfire ignitions, but also provide situational awareness. And we want to demonstrate the capability of these drones to fly in adverse conditions in the evening and at night. That is where we were having those limitations to detect fires. And we want to demonstrate that they can also follow dry lightning storms to detect the ignition as it happens. And the importance is ultimately to remove pilot vehicles from these scenarios that are quite dangerous and difficult to manage. So we are developing this capability with an Australian company that is called Carbonics. The platform we are using is called Otano. You can see a photo of the drone here. So perhaps when I started to talk about drones, perhaps the drone that you had in your mind was this kind of Mavic Pro small drone, but we are talking a bit about long endurance drone. So this specific drone can fly at 120 kilometers per hour maximum in ideal weather conditions, of course, and over 6 to 8 hours of flight autonomy. This drone is equipped with a thermal camera that have a gimbal in flying conditions for detecting the fires, and heaters is the artificial source of heat that we use. What we are also is in terms of these regulations that I mentioned, we are developing manuals and procedures for safety operations in extended visual linear of sight conditions. So this means that extended visual line of sight flying condition means that you can fly the drone quite far away, but you need to have a spotter of the drone, so you cannot lose visibility of the drone at any time for safety conditions. But we are now in the process and we have obtained accreditation for BVLOS, that is beyond visual line of sight. That means that you can completely lose track, not track, I mean, you need to track the drone, but you don't need to have eye contact with the drone. So again, we got approval for both extended and beyond visual line of sight flight procedures. We are developing manuals and procedures for safety operations in the extended beyond visual line of sight, and we are developing in the near time, we will be developing procedures for the beyond visual line of sight as well. In terms of evaluation, what we are doing, well, we've been collecting data to assess the effectiveness of the drone detection at various altitudes and under different environmental conditions using the patio heater. You have a picture there. And the figure on the left of the picture of the patio heater shows the flame of the patio heater with the different colors showing different technologies. So again, the objective is we fly the drone at different altitudes over this patio heater and with different canopy occlusion situations to determine what's the most efficient way to collect data and what are the capabilities of detecting the fires. Here I show some preliminary results from our test so far on the impact of the canopy occlusion that you see in blue in comparison with no occlusion that you see in red. And in high level, what you see is that there is a rapid decline in signal strength as the distance increases. In other words, as the drone fly higher, the signal detected is lower, and therefore the potential probability of detecting a small emission is lower. There's a significant variation in the signal strength depending on the level of occlusion. As you see, when there is occlusion, the signal is even weaker. But regardless, we could still see an approximately 0.1 meter square, that is the size of that patio heater frame, at over 600 meters with no occlusion and 200 meters with occlusion. So this kind of experiments, basically what it guides is the flight paths and the way we need to design the flight paths to be able to detect emissions. We are also doing a lot of modeling. You may be wondering, okay, but how many of these drones you need to be able to respond quickly to a lightning storm? For example, what you see here is in yellow, lightning strikes of this is a relatively small storm with only 309 strikes. It's a real storm that happened in the ACT a few years ago. And in green, you see the drone trajectories. And for this specific modeling, we are assuming a constant speed of 85 kilometers per hour with 8 hours of flight autonomy. And this is roughly an area of 2,300 kilometers square in the ACT. And the lines are the drone trajectories. So again, what we wanted to know is how many drones you need to put in the landscape to be able to inspect all those strikes for potential emissions. And these are some numbers for you to have an idea. So you have 10 drones, you have a response time of less than 50 minutes. If you are to inspect all the strikes. If you add some information to only inspect those strikes that are likely to cause higher impacts, so burn more than 1 hectare, for example, or burn more than 10 hectares, the inspection time decreases 5 minutes further. Of course, if you put less drones in the landscape, the response time increases, and if you put more, the response time decreases. So there is a little bit of an art here to see what's the trade-off and the ideal situation for responding before the fire goes out of control, and the budget that you want to spend. Just to give you an idea, one of these drones fully equipped with the camera and the algorithms can cost $120,000. So sounds costly, but it's not a lot more costly than an helicopter and even less than the operating hours of helicopters. Finally, we are also completing a report that was commissioned by the Department of Infrastructure and funded by NEMA. So this report outlines a strategic roadmap for implementing these drones technologies in Australian bushfire management. As I said before, there are a lot of barriers in implementation, and the idea of this roadmap is to provide some recommendations to further implementation. So some key findings of the report highlight that this drone technology adoption in Australia fire services is still very fragmented. There are barriers like regulatory challenges, budget constraints, and lack of standard procedures that all limit the widespread use. Of course, there are certain agencies, and we've been talking to all these agencies that have successfully used drones for situational awareness or post-fire assessment, but there is not much exploring the early detection states of the potential use of drones. Finally, we are doing a little bit of work in terms of better technologies for fire suppression. Of course, there is no point to detect a fire early if you cannot deploy firefighting resources early as well. And if we go back to the Gosper Mountain fire, for example, they were not be able to deploy RAF crews because the weather conditions, the wind were very strong, and it was very dangerous for those ground crews to be deployed. So the idea here is to try to research and develop technology that can be used to control bushfire emissions in deep bushlands under very rough weather conditions at nighttime to buy time for the ground crews to arrive. So we are still in the early stages of this, but we have prototyped a cost-effective, disposable, environmental friendly water bomb that is designed to be dropped from low-tech vehicles. So you don't need specialized aircrafts to deploy these water bombs. And also from high altitudes. So they can fly under more rough conditions, weather conditions, in difference with many current aerial suppression aircrafts that need to be flying very low to deploy the retardant. So we developed a prototype with our honors student project, and this prototype is only 2 kilos of water. It was really designed to demonstrate the potential of the approach, and we were really focusing on the delivering with a burst system that allows the dispersion of the suppression very efficiently over the fire. So it's not that the water bomb just hit the ground and made a mud path, is that the water is burst and dispersed before it hits the ground. So the next steps here, we need to gain a deeper understanding of the challenges involved in controlling and suppressing emissions in these specific situations as the Gosper Mountain fire in remote areas. But of course, we want to develop a second version of the water glider concept that is larger, can hold more water, and can be dropped by an helicopter. But the final objective is to have a large 1-ton water glider that can be again deployed from high altitudes and no specialized aircrafts. But again, this is a highly unfunded program so far, so we need to get more interest and funds for this. Well, I'm reaching the hour of talking, so I just wanted to finalize my talk with a take-home message that novel early detection and suppression technologies can add to existing capabilities. And I say add, not replace. We are never saying that technology is fully going to replace boots on the ground, but it can really add and fill in gaps in capabilities. Therefore, we must accelerate the deployment of modern technologies to detect and suppress emissions efficiently. But we know that all these technologies have specific limitations that vary with the environmental conditions. So it is very important that we quantify these limitations so we can have an optimal deployment of the suitable sensors, platforms, and models in an integrated systems way. Of course, I like to thank you, the researchers of my center, as well as the partners. We do work with a lot of industry, private industry, research centers, universities in Australia and overseas, and of course also fire and emergency and services and land managers. So I'd like to thank everyone for the support to our research. And of course, to you for listening to me for this long. And that's it. And I cannot hear anything.
Thank you, Marta. Wow, it's amazing to hear what's on the horizon. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Sue McKinnon. Thanks, Marta, very much for the talk. Just wondering what plantations are doing at the moment.
Well, plantations are very interested also in this technology to protect, of course, prevent damage in their plantations. Most of the plantations in Australia are moving into using cameras on fire towers. The Green Triangle, for example, have installed a system. Sustainable Timber Tasmania have installed another camera system. So they seems to be putting most of their coins into the cameras on fire towers. But as I said, there are limitations. It's only one of the technologies that can be used. I don't think they can fully solve the problems, even in a relatively small area that might be a specific plantation. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello, Marta. Thank you for your talk. I was particularly interested in the Scout drones, and I'm just wondering how, in terms of monitoring those, like obviously you have some person in an office sitting in front of a lot of screens. How many people is that going to take? Like how many drones can one person monitor? Is this something that organizations like Forest Fire Management might end up doing, sitting and watching those drones, just to get an understanding of staff involved? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So each drone will need to have a specialized pilot. So despite the fact that you may be streaming the information from the drone to a headquarters and being displayed on the screen, each individual drone will need to have a qualified pilot. And this is, of course, a specific limitation in current days in terms of building that capability for fire emergency services to have a qualified pilot to be able to fly this type of drones that are require a specific expertise. But again, once the data is collected, of course, can be streamed to the headquarters and be used for informed decisions. But yeah, probably in terms of manpower is you don't really substitute the number of pilots. So you just put them out of the plane because it's not safe. So you just put them on the ground, piloting the drone from the ground instead of flying in the aircraft, risking their lives, especially in this specific situation. I don't want to be repetitive, but I wanted to make sure you understand. I'm talking about filling gaps in capability, not about replacing all fire spotting aircrafts by drones or other technologies.
Thank you. Did you have a question there?
I just wonder what the effect of the wind speed has on the use of drones. We've been having a lot of very high wind gusts recently here in Victoria. Is that going to be affecting them badly?
Definitely, they are affected by the wind speed, and the stronger the wind is, the lower the speed, but also it can, of course, get to a point that may crash the drone. that's something that we are also planning to test, what is a bit more challenging, because of course you don't want to be losing a drone under a very strong weather condition testing phase, but the manufacturer itself has some threshold wind values for the drone not to be safe to be fly, but those winds are still quite high. I think it was in the order of 80 kilometers per hour, but this is from the top of my head, and I cannot by sure know if that was the number, but it was in the order of 80 kilometers per hour. What could be fly without many restrictions in the speed and without making it crash.
Thank you.
Hi, Marta. I'm just wondering if you, given the state of research and your knowledge on this topic, if you might be able to imagine a scenario for us 10 years, 15 years in advance, imagining that there's been heaps of investment in R&D and state and federal agencies have really got behind this remote detection and firefighting capability. What we might imagine those departments and perhaps the summer fire season to look like in terms of early detection and suppression, you know, the personnel, the technologies used, etc.
Yeah, well, I envisage an integrated way of addressing new emissions. So you'll have all these autonomous systems that can very efficiently detect fires under certain circumstances and not so efficiently under others. But the fire authorities will know this, and therefore they can put their efforts into addressing again those gaps and being more relaxed on and relying on the technologies for those emissions that happen under certain scenarios. But what I really believe it should happen is again to have a more integrated approach. It's not that it seems like most of the times, and I just answered the question before that forestry is moving to cameras on fire towers. So it seems like we move to this technology, this way of doing things, and we cannot be more open to an integrated approach that can leverage the strengths of different technologies and practices at different times. So I'm not sure I have answered your question directly, but yeah, I think we'll have autonomous ways to detect fires early and ways to deploy quickly firefighting resources under rough conditions where you cannot deploy people on the ground. You may always need people on the ground to fully extinguish a fire, but still you will be able to drop some retardant that will buy some time for that ground crew to arrive to the scene while the fire is still small. One of the things that is happening, and the Gosper Mountain was an example, is that where there is a lightning strike igniting a fire late in the evening, the resources are not deployed most of the time until the day after. In the past, we had this happy hour at night time where the fire were slowing down behavior, but with climate change and warmer nights, we see extreme fire behaviors during the nighttime as well. So the fires can spread still very quickly. So we cannot afford any longer to leave a fire unattended during the nighttime as we used to do in the past.
Thank you, Marta. That's really interesting. I think, is that all the questions we've got? I think our heads are full pretty much. And unfortunately, we cannot invite you to supper. We've got quite a nice spread, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been such an interesting talk and discussion. Yeah, many thanks, and yeah.
Well, thank you for having me, and enjoy your dinner. Thank you.
So for all of us not on Zoom, we can now have supper. I think we've got tea, various cakes. Are we going to bring things out here? Sounds great.